You believed that spiritual awakening would be the grand finale of your long search. You imagined that once you crossed the veil of unconsciousness, everything would finally make sense, that doubt would dissolve, pain would fade away, and peace would become your permanent home. You thought awakening would be a rising sun, warm and full of clarity. But what you found instead was silence, a heavy, almost suffocating silence. A void that feels nothing like the promises of light you were led to believe in. You expected fullness, yet you wake each day with an emptiness in your chest, a quiet ache that whispers something vital was lost along the way. You look at the world, people rushing, planning, competing, and silently wonder, what happened to me? Why does everything that once felt important now appear meaningless, hollow, drained of life? You try to force yourself to care again. You chase the old sparks of ambition, the hunger to win, to prove, to achieve. But something deep inside no longer responds. It's as if a gear has stopped turning, and perhaps it truly has. What's dying inside you isn't motivation. It's the identity that needed motivation to survive. Carl Jung once said, and it is through his voice that I speak to you now, the true awakening is not a flight toward the light, but a descent into the abyss. It's the collapse of the ego, that fragile structure built to survive in a world obsessed with recognition, status, and comparison. And when it begins to crumble, everything that once pushed you forward, the desire to be admired, to be someone, loses its meaning. Suddenly, you find yourself standing in nothingness. An invisible mourning begins. No one understands it because from the outside, everything still looks fine. After all, you've awakened, haven't you? But what few will tell you is that awakening is also destruction. It is the dismantling of illusions, the death of everything that once distracted you from your own soul. You haven't lost your will to live. You've simply lost the ability to live the old way. What once drove you, approval, competition, haste, no longer works. And in the interval between what has died and what has not yet been born, everything feels suspended. This is not laziness, it's not depression. It's your soul refusing to keep dancing to the old music of the ego. It longs for a new rhythm, slower, deeper, more truthful. But the new melody hasn't begun to play yet, and in that unbearable silence, you are being prepared, because every real transformation demands a pause, the sacred stillness between two worlds. It's the time when the old self dissolves and the new one hasn't yet taken form. This space, raw, disorienting and painfully empty, is what Jung called necessary chaos, the silent collapse of the false identity that comes before the emergence of the self, the deepest center of your psyche. What you feel now, this apathy, this absence of meaning, is not the end. It is the beginning of a new inner order. There is nothing wrong with you. You've simply stepped outside the logic of the ego and haven't yet learned to live by the logic of the soul. And the soul does not rush. It demands listening. It demands surrender. It demands the courage to remain in the void without filling it with the same old illusions. The ego, with all its masks, once gave you direction. Even if it was an illusion, it kept you moving through fear and necessity. But now, it has dissolved. And what remains is silence, the silence that feels like death, but is in truth the labor of new life. At first it's confusing. You no longer recognize your desires. You don't know what you want or who you are. And it is precisely here, in this sacred disorientation, that the real awakening begins. Because only when you've lost all the answers can you finally begin to listen. You ask me, who am I now, without what once defined me? And I tell you, You are the space between what has died and what is being born. You are the sacred interval where the self begins to breathe. Do not run from the void. Do not try to heal from it. Let it be. What feels like paralysis is, in truth, gestation. Every birth begins in darkness, and what you are becoming is already moving, quietly, beneath the silence. Every true awakening demands a time of darkness. The silence that surrounds you now is not a punishment. It is a womb, a sacred space preparing you to be born again, so do not fear it. Breathe, listen, surrender. If this passage echoes within you, if at some point on your spiritual journey you felt this strange absence of will, this space between two worlds, then know that you are not alone. Write it within yourself. I trust the silence, because silence is the beginning of all transformation. And remember, we walk this path together. Here, at Unshakable Mind, we explore the unconscious not to escape pain, but to reveal what is most real within us. You may think the world has changed, but what truly shattered was the lens through which you once saw it. The ego was that lens, distorted, tinted, built upon the illusion of control. When it breaks, what remains is a blurred horizon, a foggy field of vision where everything feels uncertain. You wake without knowing why. The old reasons no longer move you. The compass that once pointed toward achievement, goals, and recognition now spins without direction. And the soul, still quiet, still shy, still in gestation, offers no clear map. It only whispers in a voice so faint you can barely hear it, wait. And in that waiting, the body begins to feel again. It feels the exhaustion the ego never allowed to surface, the weight of years spent trying to fit into roles that were never truly yours, chasing goals you may never have genuinely desired, living to please, to belong, to prove something to others, or perhaps even to yourself. Now, stripped of the artificial push of the ego, you find yourself still. And the world, a world that worships motion, productivity, and constant striving, looks upon that stillness with suspicion. You begin to feel guilty for not wanting, for not chasing, for not burning with the same restless hunger as before. But hear this truth clearly. The sickness is not in the pause. It is in the judgment of the pause. The pause itself is sacred. Judgment is what corrodes it. Egoic motivation is predictable. It depends on applause, on results, on comparison. It thrives on your need to outperform, even if it means betraying yourself. And when the ego dies, that logic dies with it. The emptiness that follows is not the absence of life. It is the absence of lies. It is as if the entire stage of your personality collapses. The masks, the scripts, the characters, all fall to the ground, and there, naked before yourself, you must learn once again how to be. Not out of the desire to appear as something, but out of the truth of simply existing. At first, that truth has no words. It speaks only through silence, and it is here that many confuse awakening with depression, because the symptoms feel so similar. Apathy, withdrawal, the loss of desire, the loss of meaning. But there is a crucial difference. In depression, meaning collapses. In awakening, the old meaning is suspended. In depression, the soul fades. In awakening, the soul withdraws to prepare something new. You are not falling ill. You are disidentifying. You are untying yourself from a way of living that no longer represents who you are. And though this process may feel paralyzing, it is profoundly transformative. The old motivation, the one that made you run without knowing why, is being replaced by something real. An impulse that does not come from lack but from wholeness, I have called this stage the dark night of the soul. It is the moment when the old structure collapses, when what once felt solid begins to dissolve and the light has not yet arrived. But it is also the moment when the self, the authentic core of your psyche, begins to pulse beneath the surface, like a seed hidden beneath the soil. This new impulse does not seek an audience. It does not crave admiration. It is born of integrity, not approval. And for it to rise, you must endure the silence. You must resist the temptation to run back to the ego, to fill the emptiness, to resurrect the noise. Because the silence is not your enemy. It is the sacred teacher of your becoming. And here, in this quiet that feels unbearable, you are being remade, quietly, invisibly, completely. So trust this stillness, honor this pause. It is not the end. It is the sacred breath between who you were and who you are becoming. Do not try to revive the old forms of motivation. Every time you attempt to function as you once did, you move further away from what is being born within you now. This process is slow. It doesn't follow timelines. It doesn't fit into goals or promises. It demands trust, not blind faith, but an intimate knowing that something deep within you already understands the path, even if you can't yet see where it leads. The new motivation doesn't come from the mind. It rises from the body, from the soul, from the quiet rhythm of feeling. It's subtle, almost invisible, yet entirely real, and when it arrives, it doesn't explode like euphoria or rush like adrenaline. It comes softly as a calm yes, a serene will without anxiety, an invitation that doesn't push, it simply calls. And within that invitation there is space. Space to breathe, space to exist, space to simply be. This space of presence is the soil where true movement begins to grow. Because the self does not force, it flows. It does not demand, it reveals. It doesn't chase, it manifests. You might not recognize this new form of motivation at first, because it is the complete opposite of what the world taught you. It doesn't shout. It doesn't compare. It waits. It waits for you to be whole. It waits for you to stop running outward and begin walking inward. And when that happens, movement returns. But now it is movement as expression, not obligation, as flow, not resistance, as response from the self, not command from the ego. The absence of motivation is not the end. It is the sacred interval between what was and what is yet to come. It is the space where the ego dies with dignity, so that the self may rise with authenticity. This birth does not happen all at once. It happens through 1,000 tiny awakenings. In each breath you allow to be complete. In each silence you dare to endure without escaping. The path, even in darkness, is still a path. Even without energy, there is still movement, because the very fact that you are here, listening to these words, is already a silent act of your soul. It is your inner being whispering, "I have not given up on myself." And it is this quiet, patient, resilient soul that will guide you forward, not through haste, not through promises, but through truth. Because it knows, motivation that comes from the self does not push, it blooms, and blooming takes time. But once it blooms, it no longer requires effort. It is natural, it is coherent. It is you, whole at peace, aligned with what is real. If what you just heard describes what you could never quite put into words, that feeling of being lost in the void, yet sensing something greater calling you, write this truth in your heart. I am crossing the void. Remember, the void is not the end, it is the beginning. If these words touch something within you, share them. Someone you love may also be in silence, waiting for a mirror to remember who they are. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Unshakable Mind. Here we walk together through the journey of the unconscious, where darkness is not punishment, but the fertile ground where the self begins to bloom. There is a silent, almost imperceptible moment when everything that once sustained your identity begins to dissolve. That moment does not announce the end, it announces birth. You are in transition between the fall of the old and the emergence of the new. This in-between space is mysterious. Time feels suspended. Certainties dissolve. Meaning has not yet taken shape. Motivation disappears because it no longer feeds on the old sources. The promises of success, recognition, and approval have lost their flavor. The new promises, still forming, have no words yet. It is a time without answers, without direction, without clear light. And in a world addicted to speed, this state looks like failure, but in truth, it is the sacred stage of metamorphosis. Before becoming a butterfly, the caterpillar does nothing. It dissolves completely, surrendering its old form, releasing everything it once knew. For a time, it simply allows. Nothing more. That is the laboratory of the new being, and so it is with the soul. When it enters this state of suspension, it must dissolve in order to be reborn. The ego, trained to act, to solve, to control, cannot comprehend this stillness. It resists, it fights, it panics. But the soul, it knows. It knows that this stillness is sacred. It knows that what feels like death is only transformation. It knows that what is being born cannot be rushed. It must unfold. So trust the silence once again. Honor the stillness. You are not breaking, you are becoming. This is not the void of the end, it is the womb of a new beginning. The ego doesn't know how to handle this silence. It tries in desperation to revive old plans, to reignite old desires, but the soul does not cooperate. It remains still, steady, watching. And in that clash between the ego's urgency and the soul's patience, the void is born. A void that is not an absence but a fertile space, the womb of rebirth. You can feel this battle within yourself when you try to repeat old habits and something deep inside resists. When you try to force enthusiasm and your body answers with fatigue. When you follow advice to get back to normal, but you realize it's that very normal that made you sick. In that instant, the veil falls. What they called a normal life was only a performance. And now, without the impulse to perform, everything collapses. But what collapses is the lie, and that is not failure, it's liberation. The ego's motivation was fueled by fear. Fear of not being seen, fear of not being enough, fear of not being loved. Every achievement was secretly a way to escape that fear. But silence brings the fear to the surface. It stands before you, unmasked, undistracted. There's nowhere left to run. It's you with yourself, the hardest encounter, and paradoxically, the most healing one. The crossing through the void cannot be understood by the mind. It must be felt by the heart. And feeling often means crying, pausing, withdrawing, admitting that you don't know. The soul does not follow a straight line. It follows the flow of truth, and truth never hurries. It reveals itself only when the time is right, and the void is the womb where that truth is being formed. You may feel lost now, but being lost is still somewhere. It's the point where the old maps stop working, and when no map fits anymore, it's a sign that you're ready to walk your own path, a path no one has ever walked before, yours, the authentic one. This path does not begin with excitement, it begins with courage, courage to remain even without understanding, courage to listen to the silence, courage to wait. Jung said that the self, the center of the soul, can only emerge when the ego grows quiet, and the ego only grows quiet when there's nowhere left to run. Maybe this is your moment of silence, the moment when everything you believed you had to do dissolves, and what remains is to listen to what truly moves you, not what promises success, but what brings you back to wholeness, not what earns applause, but what reconnects you to what is essential. The sea crossing of the void is the furnace of authenticity. It's where the character dies and the true being is born. This new being doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need to impress, doesn't need to conquer to exist. It simply is. And being itself is already fulfillment. When you feel this, not as an idea but as a living experience, new motivation will arise, soft, spontaneous, inevitable. It will come not as anxiety but as serenity, not as haste but as clarity. It will be the will to create, to care, to share, without needing recognition. It will be the natural movement of a heart reconciled with itself. What seemed like a lack of motivation was only an excess of illusion. What seemed like weakness was only the ego losing control. Now, what remains is real, and what is real does not shout, it doesn't impose, it simply blooms. But remember, before every birth, there is always the deepest silence, and that silence may look like death, but it is gestation. Your new self is being formed in the shadows of not knowing, in the pauses of time, in the quiet spaces of feeling. Do not rush. The self is never born under pressure. It emerges only when the soul surrenders. If these words echo inside you, if you feel that you are in that in-between, between what has died and what is yet to be born, write in the comments, "I allow myself to be reborn." Take a deep breath. The void is not the end. It is the beginning of you. It is the beginning of what will finally be true. There are moments in every human journey when the universe seems to suspend all movement. Everything goes still, time stretches, life feels as if it has forgotten to call your name. In those moments, many fall into despair. They believe they've lost their way, that they're being punished, that existence itself has turned its back on them. But in truth, it's within that apparent emptiness that the spirit begins to reorganize itself. It's there, in the pause, where the soul whispers what the noise of haste has always drowned out. I, Carl Jung, once learned that the human soul moves in rhythms the ego cannot understand. The ego wants assent, progress, constant motion. It fears silence because silence unmasks it. Silence reveals what lies behind all the busyness, the fear of finally feeling. And the fear of feeling is, in truth, the fear of seeing oneself completely. Perhaps you've spent years trying to be productive, trying to fill every minute with tasks, commitments, achievements. But productivity without purpose is only a sophisticated form of escape. Yes, many keep themselves busy, not because they love what they do, but because they fear what they would discover if they stopped. And in this frantic rhythm, the mind confuses movement with meaning, but there are movements that lead nowhere. There are victories that hide inner defeats. Listen closely. The unconscious does not rush. It works in the dark, quietly, patiently, like roots that grow long before the tree dares to bloom. And sometimes the emptiness you feel is not the absence of life, it's gestation. It's the self preparing the ground for something your ego cannot yet comprehend. It's at this point that many give up. They crave quick answers, clear signs, immediate confirmations, but the unconscious doesn't shout. It whispers, and to hear it, you must slow down. So when everything seems still, Don't fight the silence. Allow yourself to listen to what your inner world is trying to say. True transformation never happens on the surface. It begins in the underground of the psyche, in the very places you've been avoiding to look. If you are hearing my voice right now, perhaps this is your call. The call to stop chasing validation and start listening to the voice you've ignored, the one that gently says, I just want to be, not to prove, not to win, just be. And when you answer that call, something within you begins to realign. The masks fall. The old ambitions lose their shine. You begin to see that what once defined you, your work, your image, your success, no longer contains you. Because now, what you seek is no longer a place in the world, but a home within yourself. And this is a silent process, sometimes painful, because it demands detachment from your former selves. The ego resists, it screams, it tries to pull you back into distraction, into urgency once again. But the self is patient. It knows that the soul moves at another pace, and that every pause, when lived consciously, becomes a portal. So when the world demands speed, choose presence. When it demands results, choose coherence. And when your mind says, you're standing still too long, answer it gently, I'm preparing to bloom. It's in this state of conscious stillness that true strength is born. Not the strength of control, but the strength of clarity. Not the strength of performance, but the strength of authenticity. What is born from silence endures. What is born from in haste dissolves. And if these words resonate within you, pause for a moment, breathe deeply, feel the weight you've carried, the burden of believing you must always be in motion. And then, let it go. Let go of control, let go of performance, let go of disguise. The soul doesn't want you to do more, it wants you to be more. There is a vast difference between being busy and being alive. To be busy is to react. To be alive is to respond with awareness. And when your actions rise from that place of deep presence, they become sacred. Every gesture, every word, every pause, each becomes an expression of the self, a movement that reconnects you to the wholeness of who you are. So before you rush to the next step, allow yourself to stop, to feel, to breathe. Silence is not your enemy. It is the beginning of everything real. Silence is not emptiness. It is a mirror. And when you face it, you begin to see the one who has always been there, the one who exists beyond roles, beyond goals, beyond fear. If this reflection touches something within you, write in the comments, I choose to listen to the silence of my soul. Because this is the space where true self-reconnection begins. Here, every word is an invitation to consciousness. Every video is a mirror where the unconscious reveals itself. In the next part of this journey, we will explore one of the greatest mistakes of the modern soul, using action as anesthesia, when doing becomes a way to escape from being. There is a type of movement that feels like progress, but is only avoidance. A kind of action that gives the illusion of advancement, but in truth, only masks the pain of not knowing what you really feel. We live in an era where being busy has become synonymous with being well, but what many call productivity, I call anesthesia. It is the ego's desperate attempt to avoid hearing the silent cry of the soul. Learn then, when action becomes distraction, it disguises itself as purpose, wears the mask of efficiency, but inside it is only fear, fear of stopping and facing the void. And the void, my friend, is what reveals the most, because it is there that the soul begins to speak. When you occupy yourself too much, you avoid this encounter. But when you allow yourself to be still, what once seemed nothing transforms into everything. The soul does not want to see you merely doing. It wants to see you being. It does not desire the hurried movement, but the movement of coherence. It wants to see you rooted before seeing you in action, because only action that emerges from the center is true. Action born from the ego is reaction, defense, fear, disguised as strength. But action born from the self is presence, expression, a dance with time. When doing becomes a way to escape feeling, life turns into a theater. And the lead actor is the ego, playing roles that no longer belong to you. The soul, however, does not want a performance. It wants authenticity. It wants every gesture to be an intimate response, not an attempt to prove something to the world. There is a secret beauty in temporary uselessness, a silent power in not knowing what to do. It is in this space that the new begins to germinate, because the soul can only create when you stop trying to appear. In nothingness, everything begins. It is when you stop pretending to know the way that the path begins to reveal itself. Breathe. Feel the now, without trying to change it, without trying to fix it. Just be. To be is the most healing verb there is, to be with yourself without demands, without performances. And it is from this stillness that true will arises. Not the will to be someone, but the will to simply exist in harmony with what is. You begin to realize you don't need to do so much to deserve being here. Simply existing is enough. And when this awareness settles in, something shifts profoundly. The need to prove yourself dissolves, urgency calms, and coherence emerges. The world taught you that value lies in results, but awakening teaches that value lies in truth. Being coherent with yourself is the most revolutionary act there is, and coherence is born from silence, not from rush. It sprouts from listening, not from performance. At this point, consciousness begins to distinguish action from agitation. The ego agitates, the soul acts. The ego seeks to impress, the soul seeks to express. The ego looks for the gaze of others. The soul is committed to its own truth. And when the soul takes the center, everything changes. You begin to move, not to assert yourself, but to integrate. Movement becomes slower, yet denser, more nourishing. It lasts, it heals, because it is no longer the world that moves you. It is the coherence between what you feel and what you do, the coherence between what you feel and what you do. If you feel the urge to go back to who you once were, pause and breathe. Ask yourself, where does this impulse come from? If it comes from fear, it is the ego crying for help. If it comes from the rising of your soul, know this: the soul has no rush, because truth does not hurry. It arrives when you stop running. Over time, silence stops being absence and reveals itself as space. A fertile space where the voices of the world no longer reach you, where demands fall quiet, where all that remains is simply you, face to face with yourself. And it is in this encounter that the new begins to emerge. Not a loud, goal-driven, fear-fueled motivation, but a calm, mature, intentional will to live with presence. In this state, the soul teaches you to listen to the body. It knows what is true long before the mind decides. You begin to feel who nourishes you and who drains you, what expands you and what contracts you, what is genuine and what is mere habit. This listening changes everything. It does not seek to please or to conquer. It simply recognizes. It is raw, visceral, authentic, and for that reason, profoundly transformative. You start to notice that old pleasures no longer resonate, and small things once mundane now touch you deeply. Is it coincidence? No, it is the soul reorganizing. It is the self, as I said, taking the place of the ego at the center of the psyche. The self does not act out of fear, it acts out of coherence. It seeks wholeness, not spectacle. It seeks journey, not applause. As you listen to this internal movement, the external world begins to respond. People whose vibration no longer matches yours drift away. Those who resonate with your new truth draw near. Old opportunities lose their shine, and new, more aligned ones emerge naturally. This is not coincidence, it is resonance. Reality begins to reflect the level of consciousness you maintain. But this resonance must be nurtured. Awakening once is not enough. You must sustain it in daily life, and that requires courage, because the world still values speed, appearance, and performance. But you already know, every time you force yes when the body says no, something inside you suffers. Every time you silence a truth to be accepted, the soul retracts. Every time you seek recognition outside, you disconnect from your center. Being faithful to what you hear in the silence is an act of strength, a rare strength, but one profoundly necessary. The world does not need more busy people. It needs whole people. People whole enough to act from the soul, not from fear. If this message resonates with you, write in the comments, "I choose to act from the soul." Not in haste. Remember, each video on the Unshakable Mind channel is a mirror of your own inner journey. Subscribe, dive deeper, and let these reflections guide you back to your center. Here, you are not required to be perfect, only true. In the next block, we will explore what happens when this new consciousness begins to transform not just the individual, but everything around them. Relationships, choices, destiny. Prepare to understand how inner coherence even shifts the movement of the universe around you. Every attempt to fit in again will be painful because now you feel you can no longer force yourself. And if you try, the body resists, the will fades, and the soul falls silent again. You know that returning to the old state would be a violence against everything that has been reborn in you. In this new way of being, motivation arises when you are whole, when what you feel, think, speak, and do are aligned. When you do not betray yourself, when you act from presence. Rather than necessity, everything changes. You walk with trust, even without knowing exactly where you will arrive, because you trust what you feel, what pulses within, and you know the soul knows the path, even when the mind does not understand. Jung said that the self is the regulating center of the psyche, and when this center is assumed, everything around you reorganizes. It pulls you toward a truer, deeper axis. It does not respond to expectations and the external world. It responds to the inner call. And when you follow this call, life may not look grand on the outside, but it becomes magnificent on the inside, because it is lived with presence, surrender, and truth. This process is ongoing. It has no end. Awakening is not an event. It is a practice. It is waking up to yourself every day, checking, is this still mine? Does this still make sense? Does this still resonate with who I am now? If the answer is no, you let it go. Not out of arrogance, but out of fidelity. Because you have learned that your soul is worth more than any achievement, your peace more than any role, your wholeness more than any applause. It is in this state of internal fidelity that new motivation arises. It does not shout, demand, or force. It invites. And when you accept the invitation, life begins to flow from the inside out, not as a script to follow, but as a dance to feel. In this dance, each step is guided not by the mind, but by the soul. The soul is no longer silent. It is in communion with you. The motivation that emerges after spiritual awakening no longer takes the form of burning desire, anxious urgency, or the need to prove something to the world. It presents itself as an inner coherence, silent yet constant, a presence that asserts itself gently. You no longer push yourself to live. You are carried by something from within, something that requires no force, only surrender. It is a new kind of impulse, not driven by the pain of lack, but by the pleasure of presence. In this state, you feel the desire to do simple things with depth, to cook with attention, converse with presence, care for plants or people, not out of obligation, but out of connection. The soul finds motivation in being fully present in the now, and the now, lived with wholeness, is sacred. There is no longer a compulsion to act. There is a sincere desire to act, to be a channel of your own essence. This new movement is slower. It respects cycles, listens to the body, pauses when something within silences. It refuses to continue out of inertia. It may seem strange in a world that demands consistency, productivity, and performance, but the soul has a different rhythm, the rhythm of truth. And the more you live in this rhythm, the closer you get to real life, the life that pulses, that feels, that vibrates. New motivation does not aim to take you further out. It aims to take you deeper. The deeper you go, the further you move from the old logic. You realize you do not need to always be creating, responding, or performing. Often pause is the most powerful gesture, silence the most honest speech, listening the most generous action. This internal shift brings serenity, independent of external achievements. Motivation arises from communion with your own soul. There is no purer fuel. It does not exhaust you, it nourishes you. It comes not from obligation, but from desire. Not from fear of error, but from the joy of being. You begin to rejoice simply for being. Faithful to what you feel, for living aligned, choosing consciously, moving only when something inside says yes. This yes is unlike anything you've ever felt. It is not excitement, it is truth. Jung said the self is the organizing center of being. When motivation arises from the self, everything aligns. You begin to attract situations that resonate with your essence, to live encounters that mirror truth, and to perceive that life, when lived from the self, is deep, whole, real. If this video reflects what you feel, leave a comment, like, and share. Perhaps someone you love is also in silence, needing a mirror to recognize themselves. The silence, the absence of drive, the emptiness you felt, none of it was abandonment or failure. It was an invitation to find yourself, to shed the masks, to learn that the most authentic life does not depend on constant motion, applause, or external validation. It is in this space that the self flourishes, that the soul breathes, that truth finally manifests. You are not standing still. You are in transition, leaving behind the old, the automatic, the conditioned, and opening space for the new, for your genuine way of being. Every hesitation, every moment of stillness, every tear or sigh of frustration is a step along this path of self-discovery and reconnection. You learn that you no longer need to chase anything, because everything that truly matters already pulses within you. New motivation does not demand force, does not pressure, does not shout. It arrives as a whisper from the body, from the soul, from presence. It is calm, steady, constant. It is a motivation that does not wear out because it arises from coherence, the alignment between who you are and how you act. And it is this coherence that transforms every gesture, every choice, every moment of life into something profound, true, and meaningful. When you allow yourself to listen to this inner calling, you notice that the world begins to arrange itself around your essence. People, opportunities, experiences, everything aligns with your new vibration. It is not magic, it is not luck, it is harmony with who you truly are. And even if the process falls silent again, even if the impulse disappears, do not fear. It is only the self asking for more space, more patience, more surrender. What you feel now is not loss, it is rebirth. What once seemed like a lack of motivation is actually preparation. It is the soul saying, wait, grow, become. Hold before you act. Become yourself, and when that moment comes, everything you do will carry truth, weight, and beauty. If you recognized yourself at any point in this journey, share it in the comments. Like this video and send it to someone who needs a mirror to see themselves. Because the soul does not grow alone, it grows when it finds resonance, presence, listening, and above all, true motivation, the one that arises from the self, always arrives. It comes to those who learn to wait. You are on the path, and the path, even in silence, is already movement.